Hello and welcome again to Sport on Lot, the podcast digesting the week's sports news with interviews and analysis. Coming up, we'll be discussing player welfare in football. That's after the inquest into the suicide of Jamie Whiston, who was released from Manchester City as a teenager. How does it feel being let go by a leading academy so young? Sebastian Bassong tells us about his experience at Clairefontaine before going on to play at the World Cup with Cameroon and in the Premier League with Tottenham and Norwich. Then there's news of the vaccination row in the NFL, and in cricket, fresh developments in the Yorkshire racism scandal. There's so much to get through as ever with myself, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, and alongside me, Martyn Ziegler from the Times and Tariq Panja from the New York Times. And we did all spend a fair bit of time in each other's company this week, particularly the Premier League clubs meeting in London. Before then, there was a trip to the cinema for Tariq and myself to see Arsene Wenger, both in person and on the big screen. Tariq, it was a fascinating and introspective look at Arsene's life, really philosophical, wasn't it, the film?
Yeah, filmed by Gabriel Clark, well known to British viewers for his touchline reporting for ITV, but also some great documentaries. And I think this is another one on Arsene Wenger. He'd been trying to convince Wenger for years to make a film, and now he's left Arsenal, finally managed. And it's kind of it wasn't a hagiography at all. I don't think it was an interesting, snapshot of his 22 years. But there were a lot of interesting guests. And the thing is, Wenger has been doing the rounds. The night before, he was in London again on Monday night at the London Palladium with David Dein, the former Arsenal chief executive. The pair are great friends, and they were talking on stage about their friendship and their lives together on behalf of David Dein, his charity, the Twinning Project, in which he's been taking Premier League teams and Championship teams into prisons as part of a rehabilitation program. But the most interesting revelation there for me was David Dein telling us he was effectively a broker for Arsene Wenger's future career. He said, there was a chats in 2018 around the Russia World Cup between two of football's heavyweight organisations, UEFA and FIFA, to see who will sign Arsene Wenger. And he said he advised Arsene to go to FIFA because he wants him to end at the very top. And he decided that was FIFA. I'm not sure how well that will go down at UEFA, but there you go.
I did actually encounter them in this process at the World Cup in Russia in 2018. Saw David Dein and Arsene Wenger on the way to the final, actually, in Moscow. I'd seen him as well around the FIFA hotel in the Russian capital. In fact, once Arsene managed to disrupt an interview I was doing with Davor Suker. So that was an interesting moment, seeing them engage, even if my interview did have to wait for a bit to resume. And yeah, it was interesting to see Arsene this week at the cinema in Finsbury Park. We got a chance to chat about the more contentious current part of his life in his FIFA role, about the biennial World Cup plans he is pushing and trying to gain support for, all that resistance in Europe. But above all, to hear him in self-analytical mode in the film was absolutely fascinating. He was reflective on the selfishness he thought during his own career, not making enough time for his own family and tilting the balance too much in favour of Arsenal. And now he says in the film he's trying to repair some of that and make up for the missed opportunity to spend time with his family. So Invincible is well worth a watch. It's in cinemas in England at the moment, a few of them. It's going to be on DVD later in the month, then in the UK at least on Amazon Prime in the new year. And it was also interesting to see a strong turnout from the current Arsenal CEO, Vinay Venkatesham, technical director Edu, and of course Wenger's former player to manager Mikel Arteta. So there was perhaps a strained relationship given the manner of his departure from Arsenal 3 years ago, but maybe we're starting to see a new sign of closeness between Arsenal and one of their true greats in their club history.
Yeah, David Dein is a man who loves to broker a deal. He's told before how he brokered the deal to get Sven Goran Eriksson to come to take over the England team. And actually, at the Russia World Cup, Dein was sort of quite a man in demand because he had his own private jet flying around to all the venues. He managed to go to 24 different matches. And because he had space in his jet, he would take people like Wenger, Occasionally took some FIFA members with him. So yeah, he is definitely the man with his finger in the right pies for that job.
And potentially, Zeke, so you mentioned flying around on planes, a useful ally for the FA and the other home nations, Republic of Ireland, should they bid for the World Cup in 2030. He certainly seemed to be really keen on bidding on Monday night.
And whether they should pursue that bid is something we explored on a pod a couple of weeks ago, if you take a listen back to that. What else happened this week? Well, I met with Jill Ellis, the former US World Cup winning coach, to talk as well about how she's trying to introduce biennial World Cups in the women's game. And to do that, I had to duck out of where we were all sitting around, which was a hotel in central London where the Premier League club chairs and chief executives and other directors were meeting for their quarterly meeting. And it was the first since the Newcastle takeover by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And Newcastle was very much on the agenda because of that freeze on related party commercial deals that was imposed by 18 clubs voting in favour of it in the days after the Newcastle takeover. So what it prevented the new ownership from doing was getting other Saudi state-backed entities from sponsoring Newcastle. So there is no Saudi sponsorship across the stadium yet. And the Saudi Public Investment Fund is hoping that the moratorium on such related deals will be lifted very soon. Now new rules are being drawn up, and we're led to believe that those new rules will see the Premier League having to sign off on any such related party transactions and assess whether they are being done at fair market value, so weighing them up against similar sorts of deals at other clubs as well. And most interestingly, we all got a chance to stand around and have a chat with Amanda Staveley afterwards, the new Newcastle director. She helped to broker the takeover, now owning 10% of the club through her PCP Capital Partners.
Yeah, she spoke at some length actually, talking about the frustrations of not being able to do any deals. They've still got the Sport Direct banners up at St James's Park, and so they are very much hoping that this moratorium temporary ban gets lifted in 2 weeks' time. She sits on the working party of about 8 clubs, which is looking into the new rules around sponsorship deals with related party transactions.
One of the things I still don't understand is if these Sports Direct badges and banners and insignia all around that stadium, why can't they be removed? What has that got to do with signing new sponsors? I still couldn't quite understand. Did you explain? I mean, I was there as well. I'm still scratching my head. It's your stadium. You own the ground. Why do you need a new sponsor to remove the old sponsor?
I think that there is a financial penalty if you take down the Sport Direct banners before the end of the season. And I don't think they want to incur that financial penalty from Mike Ashley until they get new sponsors in place. I think that's what the situation is.
But aren't they loaded?
Well, I think they think they will be loaded once they get their sponsorships in place.
Well, we did actually ask Amanda about this when we were on the record, so this is what she had to say.
Was this a big stretch for you personally?
No, not at all.
Are you loaded then?
No, I'm not loaded.
No, I mean it's important.
We wouldn't be buying I feel very happy and comfortable with the investment we're making.
Is it your biggest one personally?
No, actually, I'm just buying next week. We're buying a big estate. I'm buying personally. Audrey Hepburn's estate should go through next week, and we're buying a hotel and 3 other. No, I bought a hotel in LA, in New York from the Rubens, which was about 60 million. We sold it, which was where the capital for this came from.
The Rubens, of course, owning 10% of Newcastle, just like Amanda Staveley as well now. Tariq, your thoughts on her reply?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not a businessman, as you know. I mean, you get a sense in that conversation of how all these relationships are so intertwined. I must say I was quite surprised at the PCP. Again, we've talked about that. We still don't know how significant an investment company this is, although she said she's managed assets for decades by the sound of her words that yesterday, that it required the profits from a New York hotel, not sure which one, that she bought from the Rubin brothers and sold to buy her stake in Newcastle. That'd be interesting. It just shows perhaps what close friendship and relationship she has with Reuben Brothers, and of course Jamie Reuben is the family representative on the board at Newcastle.
Can we just take a break? Because I've got, this third party this remuneration transaction thing. This person might confirm it for me.
Go and find out. Check that bit of information for us. But we might just keep chatting while you're away. Let's just paint a scene of what things are like when we're at the Premier League meeting. We were there for about 8 hours in the hotel in central London. We get to chat to some executives from clubs. Some briskly go by. Others do actually linger and have a bit of a conversation, a catch up. Some more substantive than others. We, like to get a sense of what's in play. It helps to relay things to the fans as well, more broadly, to break down some of the mystique of these sorts of meetings. And Amanda is someone who chose to chat with us for 15 minutes, which is very welcome on the record, because it means we can actually convey, in her words, to a wider audience what's going on at Newcastle, what the perspective is of the new ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, she's the only one who really stopped for a conversation at any length. But I must say, I wasn't that surprised it was her. She has not been someone who is shy of media and media profile, which is great for us. She's very engaging company in that sense. But her own profile, Amanda Staveley, the businesswoman, largely has been built on the back of her place in the British media, I would argue. And I think I said to you, Rob, I reckon one person will stop, and they'll stop at length, and that's what proved to be the case. She understands. I think her great skill is understanding the wants of the media, from before the takeover to the day of the takeover, and subsequently. She has been a very public figure, perhaps the most public figure of any owner in recent time I can recall, or any club director.
And to make clear, there was nothing off limits in the conversation with Amanda Staveley. We did delve into all areas of Newcastle. There was no hostility when more contentious issues were brought up. And that does juxtapose with some of the reaction from some Newcastle fans on social media, who can be a bit hostile, even threatening to some journalists, raising some of the controversies around the takeover. But one thing that was notable is she did refer to the Saudis owning the club, which might not seem significant, but it is when some are trying to deny at times that it is a Saudi enterprise, even those with the public investment fund. So, Amanda Staveley, in touch with reality on that.
Yeah, she mentioned Saudis more frequently throughout that exchange.
Well, I mean, it is Saudi owned. It's Saudi PIF owned. I mean, I don't think anyone's disputing that.
Apart from PIF.
I mean, anyway,
despite being on a Saudi government domain, as we discussed on a previous pod. But Martyn, it's good to have you back with us, and I'm hoping you've gleaned some more information about something we discovered from the Premier League meeting about related party deals. And this part of the new regulations relates to transactions between players and coaches with companies potentially linked to the ownership, and the need in future, it seems, to have to declare them to the Premier League if these new rules go through. Where does this all come from? Well, Football Leaks in 2018 showed us Roberto Mancini, while Manchester City manager, might have been earning a larger salary at a point from an Abu Dhabi team owned by Sheikh Mansour than by City themselves in Manchester. City have never commented on this. We've never managed to glean anything from Mancini himself either when asking.
Yeah, so this working group, which has been set up to look at related party sponsorship deals, 8 clubs sitting on it. It's Richard Masters, the Premier League chief executive, is on it. So it's looking at. I think we talked about it in a previous pod. What it's saying is, you're going to have to get Premier League approval for any new deals to make sure they're of fair market value. The other thing they're going to look at is closing this potential loophole around, as Football League suggested with Roberto Mancini, that not only was he paid by Manchester City, at the same time he's being paid by Sheikh Mansour's other club, Al Jazeera, actually more money than is being paid by Manchester City. So what the new rules are going to state is that any sort of related party remuneration for players or staff will also have to be approved by the Premier League. So that becomes part of the whole financial regulations.
It can't presumably only be because one Roberto Mancini payment was found on football leagues. You do wonder if there's a lot more there in terms of, we've named that off the book payments, that would focus the minds to do something like this. It's a very hard thing to track, presumably, when these teams are owned by oligarchs with multiple interests, conglomerates, etc., and entire nations. You do wonder what the books of the Premier League teams would really look like sometimes when they're owned by such enormous entities in such a competitive sporting environment.
And to be clear, Manchester City have never responded specifically to these allegations from football leagues, particularly the documentation showing payments from the club in the UAE owned by Sheikh Mansour to Roberto Mancini when he was manager. We had a chance to ask Roberto Mancini himself when I encountered him early last year, and he was reticent to discuss it in any way. Obviously, it'd be interesting to know just what advice he did give. I've also asked Pep Guardiola if he has any sort of similar arrangement advising another club in Sheikh Mansour's overall group too. Of course, he could be earning that money. The only interest is how it relates to financial fair play compliance, particularly around the world of UEFA.
That Mancini report from Football Leaks was never able to be sort of challenged by UEFA in the end because the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled it was out of time.
And Manchester City facing no Champions League ban in the end from that UEFA financial fair play case. We'll keep you updated on the progress of those new Premier League financial regulations. Now, something unrelated regarding Manchester City in the last week, it was the inquest into a former City youth team player, Jeremy Whiston. He was found hanged at his family home when he was 18 years old in October 2020. That was less than 2 years after he was released by City, and there were claims at the inquest that Whiston didn't get the right support he required after leaving the club.
Well, that's what the inquest was told by his parents. Jason Wilcox, who's the head of Manchester City's academy, also gave evidence, and actually I thought did a sort of fairly decent job at saying what they had done to support him. But I think it does throw the whole issue around players being released by academies, because being released by an academy it's the norm. It's not the exception. Most players who go into academy are released. It's only a small fraction who make it through. So it's an ongoing problem, is how you sort of help people cope with the disappointment, because it shatters their dreams. But it's the reality, and for some people that's just it's a hard fact of life. But it's definitely a challenge that lots of clubs are now being faced with, how they can try and look after these young people better. But at the end of the day, you can't, if you're not going to provide them with the opportunity to fulfill their dreams, it's difficult. It's difficult, isn't it, to for anyone to deal with that?
Absolutely. It's different to perhaps any other walk of life where you're told you will not have a professional career when you are. Well, I did a story in 2017 and I met 8 and 9-year-olds who were released from Premier League clubs. And the thing that struck me was it's the engagement of the entire family, mums and dads, so invested in pre-teens professional futures as footballers. The intensity of it took me by surprise, and then that hammer blow when you aren't fully matured as a human being. There's an enormous responsibility for these clubs, because these children are watching TV and seeing just that very elite level of stardom, of the sport they love, and all of them in the academies think, oh, that could be me, and that is quite a heavy emotional toll when you're told, well, it's not going to be you. And I think, the clubs have enormous responsibility, but so does the kind of environment around them, mums and dads as well, extended family. It's such a big deal. I've been around this this thing for a while. It's, to be honest, I find that quite awful because it's a farm. But is there any other way of doing this? Do you think there should be another way of maturating football players from childhood, adolescence to professionals that isn't so harsh, or is it just a fact of life that this is how it must be?
Well, I've been able to get a perspective on what it's like to be released from one of the best-known youth academies, Clairefontaine in France. That's what Sébastien Bassong experienced. He then did go on to forge a professional career, starting at Metz, before heading to England, where, amongst others, he played for Norwich, Newcastle and Tottenham in the Premier League. He also went to the World Cup with Cameroon. And I caught up with Bassong at the Premier Sports Network conference in London, where player welfare was high on the agenda. Bassong's now 35, he's been studying personal development in coaching, and he goes around clubs talking about the mindset of players. And I asked him about how players cope with the end of their careers or not even making it as a pro.
And that's one of the first questions I ask them when I get into one-to-one, like, what's your dream? What's your destination? What's your purpose? And if they tell me that they want to be a football player, I said, look at me, I'm 35. I had a tremendous career, but my life just stopped. So being a footballer can't be your destination. Football is your vehicle. It's going to take you to your destination. And that doesn't take anything from the fact that you're going to be a baller. But put in your mind that that's just a part of your life. So, and when you get them aware about, okay, there's something bigger than that, all right, so they can be free. They can be free to really play freely, knowing that they're not trapped, they're not labeled just as a baller, but they have to do what they got to do.
What do you remember about your own early years? You came through the Clairefontaine system. Were there moments you were wary, you didn't know whether you'd make it as a professional or not, and big meetings when your future was decided and you went in thinking, am I going to be kept on? Am I going to get to join a club?
Yeah, like at the start when I was younger, I didn't want to be a football player. Honestly, I was just playing football, down my block, just to not be at home. Then when I got picked at Clairefontaine, we used to do 3 years, and I did only 2. I got released. I cried my eyes out, and that was a disaster. And so yeah, I've been through all those situations, like meetings where, what am I going to do? Am I going to carry on? That pressure started especially when you're at Clairefontaine, because it was the biggest academy. So when I was 12, 13, we already, we were playing with that pressure. Oh, who's going to go? Who's going to get released? Who's going to get released? And yeah, that gave me a lot of strength. And this is what I do in my job. I want them to identify what drives them. When I got released from Clairefontaine, he could have done 2 things. I had already signed for Metz, FC Metz, but he could have done 2 things: keeping me down or give me the boost. And that, thanks for me, that I've done the opposite. That boosted me. I cried for a little bit, but then I realized with a lot of the likes of Lassana Diarra, I remember he was young, he came to me and said, Seb, don't worry, you got it. And my dad was helping me. And then I said, and the people from my neighborhood, I said, don't worry, you got this, you're only young. And I turned this around. And that's something that I never forgot in my head. And that was one of the reasons I was getting up every single morning. I had to prove them wrong. I had to prove them wrong, especially because at the time there was people they were famous, when you're young, and I wasn't one of them. I was good, but I wasn't the most talented. So I had to make it up. I had to make the most of what I had. And what I had was my heart, was my determination, my resilience. And that's how life is. You got moments who shaped your life, who shaped your character. I became who I am today because of a lot of different incidents. And that's why I want even the kids to understand, you're not the way you are. You're not born like that. What happened to your life? I want you to understand who you are. And then once you know that, you'll be free. And you're not going to survive, you're going to live your life.
Which players were with you at Clairefontaine when you...
Abu Dhabi, Atem Ben Arfa, Ricardo Fati, Blaise Matuidi, we got Mehdi Benassia. We had there's a lot of players.
But the fact is, when you got to Metz, then you felt, actually, it's not Clairefontaine, but I can make something, and you had a great career?
No, yeah. I went there with a good contract because I came out from Clairefontaine, but, it was different. In Clairefontaine, you're being pampered. It's like the elite. So when you get Metz, you go down with the real things, the real competitiveness. Like, we're getting older a little bit. People, they want to make it. Although you're a team, in the academy, but it becomes a little bit more ruthless. So you touching base on, okay, so it's not the same. And it's not as technical as like pure as the football that I used to be taught at Clairefontaine. At Clairefontaine, you sleep with your own ball, you play football all the time, like you're getting taught like the basic of the basic, how to put your foot and how to make. In Metz, it became more practical because you need the result. Because now you're in an environment, in an industry, they need to have result. So the mindset kind of starts shifting, and it takes time to get used to it. Because my first year I was good, but I was just like, I was relaxed. I wasn't taking it seriously. I came out of Clairefontaine, so it took me a time. Oh, I get a lot of bollocked. Like, you think you're still in Clairefontaine? Now you're gonna. And it's different. It's cold, northeast of France. I'm far from Paris, so. But yeah, I had a good support.
And these are experiences help to relay to the next generation.
Yeah, you need to do what I do, you need to have a strong experience because you need to connect with them. You need them, even though we're not from the same generation, they need to understand that, hold on a minute, he lives the same life that I'm living now. It's like my kids, they say, oh, daddy, you're an old man. So what are you talking about? Everything is happening now, it happened at my time, and I'm only 35. So, yeah, you need to make them understand that, all right, it ain't so different. And then bit by bit, step by step, you're able to really reach them and to make them understand that all you want is the same thing that they want. But you know a little bit more. So I need to shock you a bit to show you that maybe you don't know as much as you think you know, but you got the great potential. So, but what do we do with the potential? Nothing. We don't put it to action. And this is the ones who are going to make it to a real level and a sustainable level. So that's the difference. People think that, hey, I want to do it until they know what it's like. Everyone want to be a beast until they have to do what beasts do.
Fascinating insight there from Sebastian Bassong. Just broadening this issue out, one of the issues seems to me is the fact that players are often joining club systems so much earlier on now. So the dream of a career in a game is there for so much of their early life, so much of their time when they're going through school. And perhaps it can shift their focus when they're going through education because they can see a career at the end of it, great wealth potentially, even particularly good payout to the Premier League in England into the EFL and downwards. So having that taken away from you at such a young age can be really difficult. And these youngsters are also losing the highly regulated environment they're in for such a young age, going through training, they build that team ethos, and there's the potential that they lose the camaraderie with their teammates, and they also might have to endure seeing those now former teammates going on to great things, even playing for their countries while still teenagers, and they have to watch that all unfold. So the obligations that clubs have when they release players is high on the agenda now, given the Jeremy Whiston case. Can they do more to discuss potential roles at the club or jobs away from football, helping them onto courses? There's also probably a financial responsibility, given how much clubs do benefit from players who graduate from their academies, who either make it into the first team or there is significant resale value. So I think we do have to focus a lot more on the welfare of players, particularly at clubs when they see the end of their dreams of becoming a professional end, or indeed just even playing at the elite level club that they might be at in particular.
It's an interesting one. So, I mean, there was a video doing around on social media I've just seen of a 7-year-old at Liverpool being hailed as the new Messi because he's doing all sorts of keepy uppies and overhead kicks and stuff. But it's if you look back 30, 40 years ago, footballers weren't allowed to join clubs officially until they were 14. But there were unofficial feeder teams, which we now know from the horrendous Barry Bennell abuse case, which clubs basically used as their own unofficial feeder teams. So I suppose the benefit now is you can start very, very young, but clubs have a responsibility, a legal responsibility, which they wouldn't have had in the past. So that's probably a positive thing, and at least they can be held accountable. So I don't think the system is necessarily broken. I just think it's something which people need to look at and try and do something to help, but I don't see any alternative to the fact that the statistics are going to show very few people are going to make it.
Less than 0.5% of all of those that will go through an academy will make, and I think that's something I guess needs to be understood. Presumably, the teams will also tell the players that, but they also want to have them being confident while they're with them. I suppose it's a tough situation, isn't it?
Moving away from football now to cricket, but we're back to the issue of player welfare because there's still the ongoing fallout of Yorkshire's response to the racial harassment and bullying of the player Azeem Rafiq. Now, we've had the chief executive of Yorkshire resigning this week. We've also had a current Yorkshire player, Joe Root, the England captain, speaking out, but in a way that did not go down well with Rafiq. And still, there are demands for greater changes at the county as they try to rebuild trust. There have already been changes to the management. And Martyn, you have been hearing from the new chairman of Yorkshire.
Yeah, I went to the press conference at Headingley with Lord Patel. He did a brilliant job. He hit the note. He just did it really well. He was hard hitting. He invoked his own racist treatment as a boy growing up in Yorkshire. He pulled no punches, and he absolutely put himself on the side of Azeem Rafiq, which is really, really important, which the club have never done before. So that was one thing. I did think I was also on the call with Joe Root when he was asked about his, whether he knew any of this chimed with him, if he recognised any of the culture, any incidents. He said he's the same age as Azeem Rafiq. He came through at the same time. He shared a flat with Gary Balance, who's admitted he used a racial slur towards Azeem Rafiq. And Joe Root said he didn't see anything untoward. So, which is why Azeem Rafiq reacted in that way. I thought I was a bit surprised that Joe Root responded like that, because I was sort of almost expecting him to say that he had seen behaviour which he was questionable at the very least, but he said he hadn't seen anything. So there's clearly an issue to be sorted out between the two of them on that front.
Well, here's what Azeem Rafiq did tweet. Disappointed is not even the feeling. Incredibly hurt, but uncomfortable truths are hard to accept, it seems. That's what Rafiq said in the hours after Joe Root's comments. And we will be hearing from Rafiq in person, or we're due to, when he gives evidence to MPs at the Digital Culture Media Sports Select Committee at the House of Commons in the coming week. The thing is about Root's comments that's striking, saying he didn't encounter racism, is he might not necessarily have, or he might not be fully aware of what even racism might constitute, or what is deemed fully offensive by someone.
That's a good point, Rob. Interesting one for you, Tariq. Lord Patel, as I say, he used very strong language. He used the P word in full a couple of times. Interesting that Sky Sports News apologised because they were carrying it live. They apologised at a break for anyone who was offended by that. The BBC bleeped it out in future recordings, when the clips that they put out. What do you think about that?
I think that both of those broadcasters made an error in judgment there, if you ask me. I think Lord Patel used those words, and I'll say it here as well, Paki, because it's so powerful. He was making a statement. He didn't use it not knowing what the impact of those words would be. He was trying to make a point. Bleeping it out diminishes, for me, the point he was trying to make. And when we talk about these words, it's the context. It's what they mean at the time someone is using them. Whether it's the abuser when they were using it, what their intention was, and the same with Lord Patel. He wanted to make that strong point. He wanted to use those words because they are so harmful. Bleeping them out for me diminishes those. Now, I would say it made me think when you asked me this, we kind of talked about it the other day when I thought about it, and it makes me think about the makeup of newsrooms as well, in general, and diversity in newsrooms. I know, woke people will be saying, stop being so woke and all of that type of nonsense, but it's important. I wonder when the culture of a newsroom or the brain's trust that decides what needs to be bleeped out is what the makeup of that is. Because we talk about adding diversity into newsrooms, but that almost often is at the ground level, at the level, reporter level, where we are out on the people who are front of camera or reporters with bylines, etc. But I'm wondering whether the people who are making decisions, whether that group has sufficient diversity in it. So when these discussions are being had, there is a diverse pool of people, whether it is whatever background they're from, gender and race. So then you can perhaps have a mix of ideas that will come up, will generate the correct response. Which in this case, certainly from my perspective, maybe others will disagree, bleeping those words out was a mistake.
Just looking at Ofcom, they're the regulators of broadcasting in the UK. They call the P word highly offensive, requiring clear contextual justification. And they have been weighing opinions on the matter, and they say many finding it unacceptable for broadcast before the watershed at times when children are particularly likely to be listening. And I can see why the word is necessary in conveying the actual tone of the offence that's being caused. And there's obligations, I would say, in terms of limiting the repeated use of it, and that's why bleeping would be used. I'd apply the same for the Y word as well, not particularly wanting to hear that being amplified largely on radio and broadcast, particularly given the way it can get repeated.
I disagree. I would disagree with you completely there, based on what they've said, and they've made a point of that context being key. I think the context of the man who's been brought in following allegations, more than allegations, racist abuse at Yorkshire, the man brought to clean it up, to talk about that issue, not being able to make such a powerful statement, makes absolutely no sense. Even based on those Ofcom regulations that you've just read out, they precisely spell out why and when it can be used. And for me, that press conference was exactly when those words can be used.
Well, it is a really delicate issue, and we're grateful to hear any feedback as well from any of the listeners. You can email us at sportunlockedpod@gmail.com or message us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, where we're at Sport Unlocked. Time to go stateside now into the world of NFL and news from the pandemic and a positive coronavirus test for the Green Bay Packers star Aaron Rodgers. What's made this even more significant as a case is the fact that Aaron Rodgers had given the impression he'd been vaccinated. He said in August he was immunised against COVID-19. Now it's emerged that Rodgers is not vaccinated. He claims that he sought alternative treatments instead. Now, why is this all particularly significant? Well, the NFL has different rules for players who have or have not been vaccinated. For instance, those players who are unvaccinated have to undergo daily testing. They also must travel apart from their vaccinated teammates. They've got to wear masks when they're in the team's HQ. That would also mean doing press conferences as well. And they shouldn't be gathering with more than 3 players at things like bars or house parties without wearing face masks. And you can face a fine if you're not following the rules. And that's exactly now what has happened to Rodgers. And he was also pictured, for instance, at a Halloween party with their teammates not wearing a mask. And this has been an absolutely explosive case in the US where vaccinations seem even more politically divisive than in Europe. And this is not just any player. This is Aaron Rodgers, the current MVP, one of the greatest stars in the NFL at the moment.
Can I just say he he's been a bit of a disgrace here because he used the word before all of this happened that he'd been immunised. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, great basketball player, and now one of sports great intellectuals, I think, great writer. He wrote a column on this week, and he pointed this out. In fact, he was telling everyone he'd been immunised using Aaron Rodgers' own words. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar called it basically a deliberate lie, because when you say immunised, everyone would have assumed you'd been vaccinated. It was only later where he said, "Oh, he's come up with his own concoction of potions and all sorts of other bits and pieces that makes him immune to the coronavirus, immune in ways that most scientists would say you are not immunized against this. The only way and trusted way that the world believes that you are immunized really are through these vaccines. And he potentially has put himself and others at risk using this. He was not wearing a mask when he was having his press conferences as well. This to me is a really awful story. And as someone who is so significant, this is an extremely famous athlete in the US's most popular sport.
And is he ever going to be named the MVP again of the NFL? Even he thinks it's probably less likely. This is what Aaron Rodgers had to say on the Pat McPhee show when asked about a controversy that is absolutely a huge issue in the United States.
You know, I made some comments that people might have felt were misleading. And, to anybody who felt misled by those comments, I take full responsibility for those comments. And I'm excited about feeling better. I'm excited about moving forward and hopefully getting back with my team and getting back to doing what I do best, and that's playing ball. It's been tough to be away from it. You know, hate is not going to bring us out of this pandemic. It's going to be connecting and love. And I'm not going to hate on anybody that has said things about me. I believe everybody is entitled to their opinion.
But the most important opinion at the moment is that perhaps of the medical experts and the health agencies who have approved COVID-19 vaccines as being safe. But for Rodgers, the issue remains about why he just wasn't open about his vaccine status because, yes, there's personal choice about whether to get vaccinated. The NFL, though, has rules and you have to abide by them, and there are different rules depending on your vaccine status at the moment to deal with the pandemic.
Yeah, the NFL rules are that if you're not vaccinated, then you have to go through a whole lot of other protocols. So for Rodgers to say he had been immunised by taking some sort of snake oil, whatever, homeopathic self-remedy is clearly misleading people. So absolutely right, he's been fined.
You know, we talked about this, I think, last week with the basketball player from the NBA, Kyrie Irving, who isn't being vaccinated and said he's not going to be vaccinated, and he was dropped from his team for that reason. And I think there's a truth to him. He's been clear. He doesn't want to be vaccinated, and his team has dropped him. This situation is completely different because this guy essentially pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, hasn't he? And led everyone to believe that he'd been vaccinated. And the other thing, and I noticed this in that column I mentioned earlier, there's a really interesting sentence or a paragraph in it quoting Rodgers' relationship with the very popular podcast host and anti-vaxxer Joe Rogan, who he's been speaking with about this. And let me just read a little bit out to you. He said, instead of consulting immunologists, he consulted anti-vaxxer and podcast host Joe Rogan, who also contracted the virus. And he said, if he ever requires open heart surgery, will he hand the scalpel to a romance writer because they know about matters of the heart? I mean, it's such a good point. Why are people leaning on expertise of people who aren't experts for something so vital? You know, this pandemic has changed the world and led to, so many deaths and so many serious illnesses. We should be leaning and relying on those who perhaps have the best knowledge. There's so much quackery out there. on these social media platforms, YouTube. My mate watched a YouTube video and he said, look, if you do this, that, and the other, you don't need to do. And it seems even sensible people have been caught up in some of this. It feels completely like the world in some ways has become unmoored, unhinged.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think players, sports people should be obliged to be vaccinated. But I do think if they choose not to be, then they have to go through these other protocols. And it's probably not very comfortable for them to do it, but I think that's a reality.
As is the fact that soon the conversation might actually extend in sport to whether or not players have had their booster jab. So not just about have you been double vaccinated, but the distance from that and having a top up too. Certainly, the issue of the pandemic is not going away at all. Though the Premier League are looking to ease some of their measures. That's something they did discuss in the meeting last week. But that's all we've got time for now this week. Great to chat as ever. From me, Rob Harris, from Tariq, Panja, and Martyn Ziegler.
Great to catch up, guys. Enjoyed our hanging out at the Premier League meeting.
Cheers, guys. Nice to be with you guys again.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, hit subscribe if you're enjoying us on whatever platform you're getting your pods from, please. And you can always find us on social media at Sport on Lots on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, where you can also send us your reaction to. But for now, enjoy the sport in the days ahead. Goodbye for now.